The chill of the late October afternoon seeped through the fine wool of Alistair Blackwood's custom-tailored suit, a cold that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the earth beneath his feet. For a year this had been his ritual, a pilgrimage to a plot of land that held more of him than his own sprawling, empty mansion ever could. The cemetery was quiet, a sanctuary of stone and silence under a sky the color of old pewter. He walked the familiar path, the crunch of gravel under his expensive leather shoes the only sound to accompany the hollow beat of his own heart. He carried a single, perfect white lily, Isabella's favorite, its petals as delicate and transient as the life it was meant to honor. He rounded the ancient oak that stood sentinel over her section and stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The lily slipped from his grasp, falling silently onto the manicured grass. Someone was on her grave, not just standing, but sleeping. A child. A little girl, curled into a tight ball directly over the marble slab that bore his wife's name, her small body rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of sleep. Her hair was a cascade of messy blonde waves, catching the weak afternoon light. She was wearing a simple, slightly too large brown coat, the kind you might find in a charity shop. One small, scuffed sneaker had fallen off her foot, revealing a sock with a hole in the toe. He stood frozen, a statue of disbelief and burgeoning anger. This was a desecration, a violation of the most sacred space in his shattered world. Who would let their child wander into a cemetery and use a grave as a bed? He took a step forward, his shadow falling over her, ready to unleash a torrent of quiet, controlled fury. He opened his mouth to call out, to wake her, to demand an explanation from the universe itself, but the word died on his lips. As his eyes adjusted, he saw her face partially turned toward him. Her skin was fair, though smudged with a streak of dirt on one cheek, and her eyelashes were long and dark against the pale canvas of her skin. In the curve of her cheek, in the peaceful set of her small mouth, he saw a ghost, a fleeting, impossible echo of the woman who lay 6 feet below. He felt a dizzying wave of vertigo, as if the solid ground had suddenly turned to liquid. He knelt slowly, the cold of the damp grass seeping into the knee of his trousers. "Hello?" he whispered, his voice hoarse, unfamiliar to his own ears. The little girl stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, not the startled, fearful eyes of a child woken by a stranger, but slow, dreamy, and a shade of blue so deep they seemed to hold the secrets of the ocean. She looked at him without surprise, a flicker of recognition in her gaze that made no sense. "Oh," she said, her voice soft and clear, like tiny bells. "You're finally here. I was waiting for you." Alistair's carefully constructed world, already fractured by grief, splintered into a million incomprehensible pieces. Waiting for him. How could this child, this tiny, disheveled stranger, possibly know who he was? He could only stare, his mind a maelstrom of confusion, suspicion, and a terrifying, illogical flicker of hope. He looked from her impossible eyes to the name carved in the stone beneath her, Isabella Blackwood, beloved wife. And for the first time in a year, the crushing weight of his sorrow was pierced by a question that was even more powerful. "Who are you?" The question hung in the air between them, a tangible thing in the cold, still atmosphere of the cemetery. The little girl sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes with the back of a small, grimy hand. She seemed entirely unfazed by the imposing figure of a man in a dark suit kneeling before her. She simply looked at him with a placid curiosity, as if finding a stranger at a graveside was the most normal thing in the world. Alistair struggled to find his voice, to impose logic on a scene that felt ripped from a fever dream. "What did you say?" he asked, his tone softer than he intended. "I said I was waiting for you. she repeated, enunciating each word with the careful precision of a child. I got tired, so I had a little nap. Is she here? She patted the cold marble slab beneath her. My mommy said she would be here. Alistair felt a fresh jolt, a sharp, painful pang that was part grief, part confusion. Your mommy? He stammered. This is my wife's grave. There must be some mistake. The girl shook her head, her blonde hair catching a stray glint of sunlight that broke through the clouds. No mistake, she said with unwavering certainty. Her name is Isabella. See? She traced the engraved letters with a small finger. That's her. Every rational instinct in Alistair's body screamed at him. This was a child, lost and confused. Perhaps she had overheard the name somewhere. Perhaps her own mother was named Isabella, and she'd wandered off. He needed to be the adult, the responsible one. He needed to find her parents, to return her to her own life and leave him to the solitary sanctity of his grief. But another part of him, a deeper, more primal part that had been dormant for a year, was captivated. There was a pull, an invisible thread connecting him to this small, strange child. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Lily," she said. Just Lily. She looked down at the fallen white flower he had dropped. "That's for her, isn't it? It's pretty." She didn't pick it up, just admired it from a distance. Alistair looked around the cemetery, expecting to see a frantic parent searching, to hear a shout. But there was nothing. Only the rustle of dry leaves and the distant caw of a crow. The silence was absolute, pressing in on them. He couldn't leave her here. The thought was immediate and non-negotiable. The sun was beginning to dip lower, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, and the temperature was dropping. "Lily," he said, rising to his feet, "where are your parents? Are they here?" She looked up at him, her blue eyes wide and honest. "My other mommy and daddy are in the stars now," she said, pointing a finger toward the darkening sky. "They had to go on a long trip. They told me to find Isabella. They said she would know what to do." The simple, childlike explanation for death sent a shiver down Alistair's spine. Other mommy and daddy? Adoptive parents, then. A wave of pity washed over him, momentarily eclipsing his confusion. This child was an orphan. Alone. The situation shifted in his mind from a strange intrusion to a profound responsibility. "All right, Lily," he said, his voice firm but kind. "It's getting cold. You can't stay here. Why don't you come with me, and we'll get you something warm to drink? We can. We can figure this out together." He extended a hand. For a moment, she just looked at it. This large, clean hand emerging from the cuff of an expensive suit. He expected hesitation, fear. A child shouldn't trust a stranger so easily. But then she smiled, a small, tentative smile that was like a crack of light in the gloom. It was in that smile, a faint, almost imperceptible dimple in her left cheek, that he saw it again. The ghost of Isabella. It was so fleeting he thought he might have imagined it, a trick of the light and his grief-addled mind. But it was there. She placed her small, cold hand in his. Her touch was like a spark, sending a warmth through him that he hadn't felt in a year. "Okay," she said. "But can we come back tomorrow? To see her again?" Alistair looked down at the name on the stone, his heart aching with a new, complex emotion he couldn't name. "Yes, Lily," he promised, his voice thick. "We'll come back tomorrow." As they walked away from the grave hand in hand, the setting sun cast their long shadows behind them. Alistair Blackwood, the man who had everything and nothing, walked away from the one place he felt close to his wife, and for the first time, he wasn't alone. He was leading a little girl who smelled of dust and autumn leaves, a girl who carried an impossible mystery and a phantom smile that threatened to undo him completely. The drive back to his mansion was a surreal journey through a world that looked the same but felt irrevocably altered. Lily sat in the plush leather passenger seat of his Bentley, her small legs sticking straight out, her scuffed sneakers hovering inches above the lamb's wool floor mats. She didn't fidget or chatter. Instead, she stared out the window at the passing city lights with a quiet intensity, her reflection a small, pale ghost against the darkening glass. Alistair drove on autopilot, his mind racing. He needed to call the authorities, report a found child. It was the correct, logical, and legal thing to do. Yet, he hesitated. The thought of handing her over to a sterile office, to the impersonal machinery of social services, felt wrong. A betrayal of the unspoken promise he'd made at the graveside. "We'll figure this out together." He glanced at her. The streak of dirt was still on her cheek. He had a sudden, overwhelming urge to protect her, to shield her from a world that had clearly already dealt her a heavy blow. When they pulled through the large iron gates of his estate and up the long, sweeping driveway, Lily's eyes widened. The house, a sprawling contemporary masterpiece of glass and stone, was illuminated from within, glowing like a lantern in the vast, manicured darkness of the grounds. "Is this your castle?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "Something like that," Alistair replied, a wry, sad twist to his lips. It was more like a mausoleum, a monument to a life that had ended. He parked the car and came around to open her door. He half expected her to be intimidated by the scale of the place, but she simply took his hand again and walked with him toward the massive front doors. As the doors swung open, his housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, was there to greet him. She was a stern, efficient woman who had been with him for years, managing his household with an iron will and a quiet disapproval of his self-imposed isolation. Her eyes, usually fixed on his face, dropped to the small hand held in his, and for the first time since he'd known her, her professional composure cracked. Her mouth fell slightly open. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice strained with shock. "Sir?" "Who?" "This is Lily," Alistair said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "She will be staying with us for a while. She'll need a bath, some new clothes, and something to eat. One of the guest suites, please, the one overlooking the gardens." Mrs. Gable, ever the professional, recovered quickly. She nodded, her gaze softening as she looked at Lily. "Of course, sir, right away." She bent down slightly, offering the girl a rare, gentle smile. "Hello, Lily. It's nice to meet you. I'm Alara. Why don't you come with me? I think the chef made some chocolate chip cookies today that you might like." Lily looked up at Alistair, a silent question in her eyes. He gave her a reassuring nod. "Go with Alara," he said. "I'll be right here." He watched them walk away, the small, disheveled child and the tall, stern housekeeper, a strange and unlikely pair disappearing down the long, marble-floored hallway. The house was a testament to Isabella's taste. She had been an architect, and this place had been her passion project. It was all clean lines, open spaces, and vast windows that blurred the line between inside and out. But without her, the minimalist elegance had become cold and sterile. The silence was its most prominent feature. A silence so profound it seemed to absorb all sound. Now, as he stood alone in the grand foyer, he could hear the faint echo of Lily's small voice from down the hall, followed by Mrs. Gable's deeper tones. It was the first time in a year that the silence had been broken by anything other than the perfunctory conversations with his staff. It felt strange, like a forgotten tune being played in a long-abandoned concert hall. He walked into his study, a room lined with dark wood and thousands of books. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, but it was unlit, the hearth clean and cold. On his desk, amidst the neat stacks of papers and financial reports, was a silver-framed photograph of Isabella. She was smiling, her head thrown back in laughter, the sun catching the highlights in her dark hair. He picked it up, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered to the smiling face in the frame. "Who is she? Is this some kind of sign? Or am I finally losing my mind?" Isabella, of course, offered no answers. He sank into his leather chair, the weight of the day, of the year, pressing down on him. He knew he was delaying the inevitable. He picked up the phone, his finger hovering over the numbers for the local police department. He had to make the call. It was the right thing to do. But then he remembered her small hand in his, her absolute trust. The way she had looked at the name on the grave, not with the morbid curiosity of a child, but with a sense of belonging. He put the phone down. Not yet. He would give it one night. One night to keep her safe and warm, away from the cold, impersonal world of forms and questions. He would hire his own people in the morning, the best private investigators money could buy. They would be discreet, efficient, and they would find the truth. He owed her that much. He owed it to the ghost of a smile that looked so much like his wife's. Later that evening, after a dinner she barely touched, picking at a plate of macaroni and cheese with a fork held awkwardly in her small fist, Lily was tucked into a bed larger than any she had likely ever seen. The guest suite was decorated in soft creams and blues, with a wall of windows that looked out onto the vast, darkened gardens where Isabella had once grown her prize-winning roses. Mrs. Gable had found her a set of pajamas from a charity donation Alistair made annually and freshly scrubbed. With her damp hair combed out, she looked even smaller and more vulnerable. Alistair stood in the doorway, watching her. "Is it a good castle?" she asked, her voice a sleepy murmur from the pile of pillows. "It's a very nice house," he corrected gently. "Do you like it?" "It's quiet," she said, and he couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a criticism. "My other house was noisy. The TV was always on." He felt a pang of curiosity about her previous life, about the other mommy and daddy who were now in the stars. What had their lives been like? Had they been happy? "You can have noise if you want it," he offered. "There's a television in the wall." "That's okay," she said, yawning. "I like this quiet." She snuggled deeper into the covers, her eyes drifting shut. "Will you tell her I came?" she whispered, half asleep. "Isabella, will you tell her I said hello?" Alistair's throat tightened. He walked over to the bed and sat on the edge, the mattress barely dipping under his weight. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of blonde hair from her forehead. Her skin was soft and warm. "I'll tell her," he promised, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't decipher. "I'll tell her you're safe." Huh. He stayed there for a long time after she had fallen into a deep sleep, just watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. The silence of the house seemed different now. It was no longer empty. It was waiting. And as he sat there in the dimly lit room, the imposing billionaire in his immaculate suit, he felt a profound and terrifying shift within himself. The grief for his wife had been a solitary, all-consuming thing, a fortress he had built around his heart. But tonight, a 7-year-old girl with dirt on her cheek and his wife's name on her lips had walked right through the gates and started a quiet revolution. The next morning, Alistair woke before dawn, a habit ingrained from years of dominating the financial world. Usually he would rise and go straight to his home gym, pushing his body to its limits to quiet the relentless noise in his mind. But today, he found himself standing by the window of his own minimalist bedroom, staring out at the mist-covered lawns. The house was still silent, but it was a different kind of silence now, pregnant with the presence of another life sleeping under his roof. He bypassed the gym and went straight to his study. Before the sun had even fully risen, he was on the phone with Marcus Thorne, the head of his personal security and a man whose resourcefulness knew no bounds. Marcus was a former MI6 agent, a man who could find a needle in a haystack if the price was right, and his loyalty to Alistair was absolute. "Marcus," Alistair said, his voice low and urgent, cutting straight to the chase. "I have a situation, a delicate one. I need you to find someone, or rather, find out who someone is." He explained the events of the previous day, from finding Lily at the cemetery to her cryptic statements about her parents. He omitted the eerie, phantom resemblance to Isabella. It was too personal, too irrational to voice to a man like Marcus. "A 7-year-old girl, name is Lily," Alistair summarized. "No last name given. Claims her adoptive parents recently died. She was drawn to my wife's grave. I need to know everything, who she is, where she came from, who her parents were, both adoptive and biological. And Marcus," he added, his voice hardening, "this is to be handled with absolute discretion. No police, no social services, not yet. This is a private inquiry. I want our own people on it, exclusively." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Understood, Mr. Blackwood," Marcus said, his voice calm and professional, betraying no surprise. "We'll start with missing children's reports in the tri-state area. Cross-reference with recent fatal accidents involving couples who might have a daughter of that age. We'll check school records, dental records, if we can get them. It will be a quiet search." "Good," Alistair said. "I want updates as soon as you have anything, no matter how small." He hung up, feeling a small measure of control return. He was taking action, imposing order on the chaos that had entered his life. This was his world. Problems were identified, resources were deployed, and solutions were found. It was as simple as that, or so he told himself. When he went downstairs, he found Mrs. Gable in the kitchen, overseeing the preparation of breakfast. The room, usually a sterile, stainless steel domain of the chef, felt warmer. There was a booster seat at the small breakfast nook that overlooked the garden, and a box of brightly colored cereal on the counter next to the usual array of organic fruits and artisanal breads. "I took the liberty, sir," Mrs. Gable said, noticing his gaze. "I wasn't sure what young children prefer." Alistair nodded, a strange feeling twisting in his gut. It was the intrusion of the ordinary, the banal details of child-rearing, into his extraordinary, sterile life. Just as the chef was placing a plate of French toast on the table, Lily appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a set of clothes Mrs. Gable must have procured overnight, simple jeans and a soft pink sweater. Her hair was brushed, and her face was clean. Without the grime and the oversized coat, she looked even more delicate. But there was a resilience in her posture, a watchfulness in her blue eyes. "Good morning," Alistair said, his voice sounding overly formal in the bright, sunlit kitchen. "Did you sleep well?" Lily nodded, her eyes fixed on the box of cereal. "Can I have that kind?" she asked, pointing. "Of course," Alistair said. He felt a moment of helplessness. Did he pour it for her? Did she want milk? How much milk? He, a man who could orchestrate a multi-billion-dollar corporate merger without breaking a sweat, was flummoxed by a box of cereal. Mrs. Gable, sensing his predicament, stepped in smoothly. "Let's get you settled, Lily," she said, guiding her to the booster seat. "How about you have a little bit of cereal and then try some of this nice French toast?" Breakfast was a quiet affair. Lily ate with a focused seriousness, occasionally glancing out the window at the dew-covered roses in the garden. Alistair found himself watching her, studying her mannerisms. The way she held her spoon in a tight fist, the way she would pause and seem to be listening to something only she could hear. He was searching, he realized, for more traces of Isabella. A turn of the head, a gesture. Anything to confirm that what he'd seen at the cemetery wasn't just a figment of his imagination. After breakfast, a new dilemma presented itself. What to do with a 7-year-old girl for an entire day? Alistair's life was a meticulously scheduled sequence of meetings, calls, and market analysis. There was no room for play. "I have to make some calls," he said, more to himself than to her. "The study is off limits, but you can explore the house. Mrs. Gable will be here." Lily looked up at him. "Can I go to the garden?" she asked. "The one with the flowers?" "Yes, of course," he said, relieved. "The gardens are extensive. Just stay where Mrs. Gable can see you." He retreated to his study, closing the heavy oak doors behind him, but he found it impossible to concentrate. The silence he usually craved felt different. It wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. He kept thinking he heard the sound of her footsteps, a distant laugh. He found himself pacing the room, stopping at the window that overlooked the back of the house. From there, he could see a section of the formal rose garden, Isabella's pride and joy. And there was Lily. She wasn't running or playing. She was walking slowly among the rose bushes, her head tilted as if she were reading the small plaques that identified each variety. She reached out and gently touched the petal of a deep red rose, a variety named Crimson Glory, that had been Isabella's absolute favorite. She leaned in, not to pick it, but to smell it, her small nose barely grazing the delicate bloom. Alistair's heart clenched. It was a scene he had witnessed 100 times before. Isabella, in the early morning light, moving through her garden with that same gentle reverence. He remembered her telling him once, "You don't just look at roses, Alistair. You have to listen to them. They have stories." He shook his head, pushing the memory away. It was a coincidence. A child in a garden. Nothing more. But the image stayed with him, superimposed over the memory of his wife, a hauntingly beautiful double exposure. The day wore on. Marcus called with a preliminary report. No missing child reports filed in the last 48 hours matched Lily's description. They were widening the search. They'd found 3 recent fatal accidents involving couples in their 30s and 40s, but one had no children. One had a teenage son, and the third had a daughter, but she was accounted for and safe with her grandparents. "It's like she dropped out of the sky, Mr. Blackwood," Marcus said, a rare note of frustration in his voice. "Don't worry. We'll find something. We always do." Alistair hung up, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. A part of him wanted Marcus to find her family, to solve the puzzle so he could return to the familiar comfort of his grief. But another, more treacherous part of him was terrified of that very outcome. What would he do if a frantic relative appeared at his gate, ready to claim her? The thought of the house returning to its profound, empty silence was suddenly unbearable. That afternoon, as he was attempting to read a market analysis report for the 3rd time, he heard a soft knock on the study door. It was Lily. She stood there, holding something behind her back. "Mrs. Gable said I shouldn't bother you," she said, her voice small. "But I made you something." "You're not bothering me," he said, gesturing for her to come in. She walked over to his desk and presented him with a piece of paper. It was a drawing, made with some crayons Mrs. Gable must have found for her. It was a child's drawing, the proportions all wrong, the colors bold and outside the lines. It depicted a tall man with dark hair in a suit, holding hands with a little girl with bright yellow hair. They were standing in a garden, surrounded by giant red and pink circles that were clearly supposed to be roses. Above them, in a bright blue sky, was a smiling sun. Alistair stared at the drawing, a lump forming in his throat. It was simple, naive, and yet it captured something profound. A connection. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice husky. "This is very good." "That's you," she said, pointing to the tall figure. "And that's me. And we're waiting." "Waiting for what?" he asked gently. She looked up at him, her blue eyes serious and clear. "For Isabella," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "So we can all be together." Alistair had no answer. He could only look at the crayon drawing of a future that was both impossible and, in that moment, desperately desired. He took a small magnet from his desk drawer and carefully pinned the drawing to the metal filing cabinet beside his desk. It was a splash of vibrant, chaotic color in the otherwise muted, ruthlessly organized room. A symbol of the beautiful, inexplicable mess that had just entered his life. The days that followed settled into a strange, unspoken routine. Alistair would go to his study, ostensibly to work, but would spend most of his time watching Lily from the window or waiting for the phone to ring with news from Marcus. Lily, under the watchful but increasingly fond eye of Mrs. Gable, explored the vast house and grounds. She was a quiet child, content to be on her own, but she would seek Alistair out at odd moments, appearing in his doorway with a found object. A pretty stone, a fallen feather, or a question. Why is the sky blue? Do butterflies remember being caterpillars? He found himself answering her questions with a seriousness he usually reserved for boardroom negotiations. He would stop what he was doing and try to explain the science of light refraction or the marvels of metamorphosis, often turning to the internet to find answers that would satisfy her insatiable curiosity. He learned that she didn't like bananas, that she was afraid of thunderstorms, and that she could hum an entire complex classical tune, a Vivaldi piece that had been one of Isabella's favorites, with perfect pitch, claiming she didn't know where she'd learned it. The song was just in her head. Each day, Marcus's team came up empty. They expanded the search nationally. They ran facial recognition software against every database they could access. They cross-referenced the name Lily with adoption records and birth certificates. Nothing. She was a ghost. She had no official existence. The only clue they had was the one Alistair hadn't given them, the unnerving connection to Isabella. He kept that to himself, a secret treasure or a sign of his own unraveling sanity. One rainy afternoon, Lily found the door to Isabella's old studio. It was the one room in the house that Alistair had kept locked, untouched, since the day she died. He found Lily sitting on the floor outside the door, her small hand resting on the wood as if she could feel something through it. "What's in here?" she asked, her voice soft. Alistair's first instinct was to say no, to lead her away, to protect that one last sacred space. But looking at her upturned face, he found he couldn't. He took the key from his pocket, he always carried it, and unlocked the door. The air inside was still and smelled faintly of turpentine and Isabella's perfume. Dust motes danced in the beam of light from the hallway. The room was just as she had left it. An unfinished canvas stood on an easel, a sweeping abstract of blues and grays. Brushes were still in a jar of murky water. Her architectural models and blueprints were neatly stacked on a large drafting table. Lily walked into the room with a sense of wonder, her footsteps silent on the paint-spattered wooden floor. She didn't touch anything. She just looked. Her eyes fell on the unfinished canvas. "It's sad," she whispered. "Is that the sea during a storm?" Alistair was taken aback. That's exactly what Isabella had said she was trying to capture. "Yes," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I think it is." Lily then drifted over to the drafting table. Lying on top of a stack of blueprints was a small, leather-bound sketchbook. Lily reached for it, then looked at Alistair for permission. He nodded. She opened the book. It was filled with Isabella's sketches, intricate drawings of buildings, quick charcoal portraits of Alistair himself, and page after page of flowers, mostly roses, rendered in exquisite detail. But then Lily turned to a page near the back. It wasn't a building or a flower. It was a sketch of a small, cozy-looking cottage nestled by a lake, with a tire swing hanging from a large tree. Lily gasped, her small body going rigid. She traced the lines of the cottage with a trembling finger. "I know this place," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. "I dream about it. There's a lady there. She sings to me. Alistair felt the blood drain from his face. He took the sketchbook from her. He had never seen this drawing before. It wasn't a project Isabella had worked on for a client. It looked personal, idyllic, a fantasy. "What lady, Lily?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Who is the lady in your dream?" Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes clouded with confusion. "I don't know her name," she said. "But she looks like the picture on your desk." The room started to spin. The picture on his desk. Isabella. The pieces were connecting in a way that defied all logic, all reason. A dream of a place Isabella had sketched, a singing woman who looked like his dead wife. It was too much. This couldn't be real. He was projecting, his grief creating patterns where none existed. Lily was an imaginative child, picking up on cues, on the atmosphere of the house, on the photograph she must have seen. There had to be a rational explanation. "Marcus," he said into the phone moments later, having left Lily with a bewildered Mrs. Gable. He was back in his study, the sketchbook open on his desk. "I have something. A long shot. A very long shot." He took a high-resolution photo of the sketch and sent it to Marcus. "Find this place. I don't care how. Cross-reference it with land registries, satellite imagery, anything. It was sketched by my wife. It might have been a personal property, something she owned before we met. I need to know if this cottage exists." "A cottage from a sketch?" Marcus sounded skeptical, but he didn't question the order. "We're on it, Mr. Blackwood." The waiting was agony. Alistair felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to discover something that would either solve everything or push him over the edge into madness. While they waited, he and Lily kept their promise. They went back to the cemetery. He bought 2 bouquets this time, a large one of white lilies for himself, and a small one of bright yellow daisies that Lily had picked out. The air was crisp and cool. Lily walked with a little skip in her step, seemingly unburdened by the strange, heavy atmosphere of the place. She placed her daisies carefully at the base of the headstone. Then she sat down on the grass, cross-legged, and started talking to the grave as if Isabella were sitting right there with her. "Hello," she said in her clear, soft voice. "I'm staying in your castle now. It's very big. Mr. Alistair has a drawing I made on his cabinet. We had French toast for breakfast." Alistair stood back, listening, his heart a painful, tangled knot in his chest. He was witnessing a one-sided conversation between a little girl he barely knew, and the wife he knew better than his own soul. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and utterly insane. "He misses you a lot," Lily continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He looks at your picture all the time. But I think he's a little bit happier now that I'm here, so you don't have to worry." At that, Alistair had to turn away. A wave of emotion so powerful, it threatened to bring him to his knees. He didn't want to break down in front of her. When he had composed himself, he turned back. Lily was lying on her back, staring up at the clouds. "Do you think," she asked him without looking at him, "that people in the stars can look down and see us?" "I don't know, Lily," he answered honestly. "But I like to think so." "Me too," she said. "I hope my other mommy and daddy can see I found her. I hope they know I'm okay." That evening, the call came. It was Marcus. "We found it," he said, and Alistair could hear the surprise in his own voice. It took some doing. The sketch was precise. The angle of the sun, the species of the tree. We ran it through a geolocation algorithm. It's a real place, Mr. Blackwood. A small cottage on the shore of Lake Serenity, about 3 hours north of the city. Alistair's knuckles were white as he gripped the phone. "Who owns it?" "That's the interesting part," Marcus said. "It was purchased 15 years ago by a holding company, a very discreet one. But when we dug deep, We found the ultimate beneficiary. The owner is, or was, Isabella Blackwood. She bought it 2 years before she met you." Alistair sank into his chair, his mind reeling. A secret cottage. A place he never knew about. A place that appeared in Lily's dreams. "There's more," Marcus continued, his voice grim. "We finally got a hit on Lily. Not through any official channels. We had to go old school. Canvassing, talking to people in the area around the lake. A gas station attendant remembered her. He said a little girl matching her description had been with a couple, the Millers, who lived just outside of town. He hadn't seen them in a while." "The Millers?" Alistair asked, his heart pounding. "An older couple, Sarah and Tom Miller," Marcus said. "They died about 2 weeks ago. A fire at their farmhouse. It was all over the local news. Tragic accident. They had one child, an adopted daughter. Her name was Lily Miller." The final pieces clicked into place with the force of a tectonic shift, shaking the very foundations of Alistair's world. Lily wasn't a ghost. She was real. And her entire world had been destroyed in a fire. She had run, somehow making her way to the city, to the cemetery, to him. But the biggest question remained, the one that connected a secret cottage, a dream, and a little girl who looked for his wife at a graveside. "Marcus," Alistair said, his voice strained, "find out everything you can about the adoption. I need to know who Lily's birth mother was. I need to know now." But as he said the words, a cold, terrifying, and yet somehow wonderful certainty was already blooming in his chest. He thought he already knew the answer. The 3-hour drive north felt like an eternity. Alistair had left Lily in the care of a very flustered Mrs. Gable, telling her only that he had to attend to some urgent business. He couldn't take Lily with him, not yet. He didn't know what he would find, and he needed to face it alone. He drove himself, the Bentley eating up the miles of highway, leaving the gleaming metropolis behind for the rustic, autumnal beauty of the countryside. His mind was a whirlwind. Isabella had a secret cottage. She had owned it for years, even after they were married, and had never mentioned it. Why? Was it a remnant of a past she wanted to forget? A sanctuary? The questions multiplied with every passing mile. As he got closer to Lake Serenity, the landscape changed. The roads narrowed, winding through dense forests of pine and maple, their leaves a riot of red and gold. The air grew crisp and clean. He followed the GPS down a small, unmarked gravel road until he saw it. Nestled in a small clearing, overlooking the shimmering, steel-blue water of the lake, was the cottage from the sketch. It was exactly as Isabella had drawn it, right down to the tire swing hanging from the thick branch of a mighty oak tree. It was charming, rustic, and looked completely untouched, as if it had been waiting patiently for someone to return. The key was exactly where Marcus had told him it would be, under a loose stone by the back steps. The lock was stiff, but it turned. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of cedar and dust. The cottage was small, just a main living area with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom, and a ladder leading to a sleeping loft. It was simply furnished, but filled with Isabella's touch. A handmade quilt was draped over the back of the sofa. A collection of smooth gray stones was arranged on the mantelpiece, and on a small wooden table by the window, there was a box. It was a simple, unadorned wooden box, about the size of a shoebox. Alistair felt an inexplicable pull toward it. His heart was hammering against his ribs as he walked over and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of items. A tiny pair of baby booties knitted from soft white yarn, a lock of fine blonde baby hair tied with a blue ribbon. A photograph of a newborn baby, swaddled in a hospital blanket, its face wrinkled and new, and letters. A thick stack of them, tied with the same blue ribbon, all addressed in Isabella's elegant, familiar handwriting. The address on the top envelope made his blood run cold. It was addressed to "My Dearest Little Star," in care of a private adoption agency that had closed down years ago. He sank onto the sofa, the box in his lap, and untied the ribbon. His hands were trembling. He pulled out the first letter, dated 8 years ago, a year before he had even met Isabella. "My dearest little star," it began. "I don't know if you'll ever read this. They tell me it's better to make a clean break, to move on. But how can I? You were a part of me. You are a part of me. Today. I had to let you go, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done. My world is so dark right now, but you are a tiny, perfect star, and I know you will shine so brightly. Your father. He wasn't a bad man, just a young and foolish one, like me. We couldn't give you the life you deserve. I had to make a choice, and I chose to give you a chance at a better one. Please know, my darling, wherever you are, that you were not unwanted. You were loved so much, it broke your mother's heart to say goodbye. I will love you forever. I will look for you in the stars every night. Love, Mama." Alistair read on, his vision blurring with tears. Letter after letter, a secret history of his wife's hidden grief and unwavering love. She had written every year on the child's birthday. She wrote about her life, her studies, her dreams. She wrote about meeting him, falling in love, their wedding. "I met a man," one letter read. "His name is Alistair. He is kind and strong, and he makes the silence in my heart feel a little less empty. I wish so much that I could tell him about you, but the shame is a heavy cloak, my love. I'm afraid that the secret, the lie of omission, is now a part of our foundation. How could I tell him that I wasn't the whole person he thought I was? That a piece of my heart was missing, living somewhere out in the world without me?" He read about her guilt, her constant ache. This cottage, he realized, was her sanctuary, the one place she could come to be with the memory of her daughter, the sketches, the letters. This was where she kept that hidden part of her life. The last letter was dated just a month before she died. "My star, my Lily," she had written. The name hit him like a physical blow. "Lily, the couple who adopted you sent a picture. They are wonderful people. They gave you my favorite name. You are 7 years old now, and you are beautiful. You have your father's blonde hair, but I see my smile in you. I see it, and my heart both soars and breaks. I've been sick, my love. I don't know how much time I have left. My biggest regret is that I will never get to meet you, to tell you this story myself. But I want you to know, if you ever find these words, that my love for you has been the one constant, secret light in my life. Your life was my greatest gift to the world. Be happy, my sweet Lily." Alistair sat there in the silent cottage, the letters scattered around him, the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor. The grief he felt was immense, a tidal wave of sorrow for the secret his wife had carried alone, for the pain she must have endured. But underneath the grief, something else was taking root. Understanding, and a fierce protective love for the little girl, who was the living embodiment of his wife's greatest secret and deepest love. Lily, his wife's daughter. The echo he saw in her wasn't a ghost, it was her lineage. The pull he felt wasn't a mystery, it was a bond, forged in his wife's hidden heart. He finally understood. Lily hadn't just stumbled upon his wife's grave. She had been led there. By a force stronger than logic, a connection between a mother and a daughter that even death could not sever. After her adoptive parents died, she had been left with only a name and a fading picture. Isabella. And somehow, that had been enough. He carefully gathered the letters, the photograph, the tiny booties, and placed them back in the box. He took one last look around the cottage, a place that held so much of his wife's pain and love. Then he locked the door, leaving the key under the stone, and walked back to his car. The drive back was different. The confusion was gone, replaced by a resolute clarity. He knew what he had to do. He was no longer just a grieving husband. He was something more. He was all that was left of a promise his wife had made to a tiny star 8 years ago. He was the guardian of her legacy. He was, in every way that mattered, Lily's family. When he arrived back at the mansion, it was late. The house was dark, save for a single light in the grand foyer. Mrs. Gable was waiting for him, her face etched with worry. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked. "Everything is fine, Ilara," he said, and for the first time he used her first name. He even managed a small, genuine smile. "Everything is going to be fine." He went straight upstairs to the guest suite. He opened the door quietly. In the soft glow of a nightlight, he could see Lily, sleeping soundly, her blonde hair fanned out on the pillow. She looked so small, so peaceful. He walked over and knelt by her bed, the wooden box held tightly in his hands. He watched her for a long time, the pieces of his life, his wife's life, and this child's life all slotting into place, forming a new, unexpected, and beautiful picture. He had gone to the cemetery a week ago, a broken man, seeking solace in the memory of a love he had lost. He had found something else entirely, not an ending, but a new, terrifying, and wondrous beginning. The next morning, Alistair found Lily in the garden, talking to the roses. He approached her quietly, the wooden box in his hands. He sat down on the grass beside her, a strange calmness settling over him. The time for secrets was over. "Lily," he began, his voice soft, "I went on a trip yesterday. I found something I think you should see." He opened the box and showed her the contents. She looked at the tiny booties, the lock of hair, and the picture of the newborn baby with wide, curious eyes. Then he handed her one of the letters. "Your mother wrote this for you," he said gently. "Your first mother, Isabella." Lily looked from the letter to him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "But she's here," she said, patting the ground. "I know," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion, "and she loved you very, very much. So much that it hurt her to be away from you. She wanted you to have a happy life, a safe life. And she wrote you letters so that one day you would know how much she loved you." He didn't read the letters to her, not the parts about shame and regret. He paraphrased, simplifying the complex story of a young woman's impossible choice into a language a 7-year-old could understand. He told her about a mother's love, a love so big it had reached for her across time and space, guiding her here, to this garden, to him. Lily listened, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, she simply pointed to the picture of the baby. "Was that me?" she asked. "Yes," Alistair said. "That was you." She reached out and gently touched the photograph. "She was pretty," Lily said quietly. Then she looked up at Alistair, her deep blue eyes searching his. "If she's my mommy, and you were her husband, what does that make you?" The question hung in the air, simple and yet earth-shatteringly profound. Alistair's carefully prepared words, his gentle explanations, all fell away. All that was left was the raw, honest truth. He reached out and brushed a thumb across her cheek, wiping away a smudge of dirt he hadn't noticed was there. "That makes me the luckiest man in the world," he said, his voice breaking. "Because it means I get to take care of you. It means we're a family." A single tear welled up and rolled down Lily's cheek. She didn't make a sound. She just launched herself into his arms, her small body trembling with unspoken emotion. Alistair held her close, burying his face in her soft blonde hair, and for the first time in a year, he let himself cry. He cried for his wife, for the pain she carried alone. He cried for the loving, adoptive parents Lily had lost, and he cried with a sense of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. The emptiness inside him, the vast echoing cavern of grief, was suddenly filled with the warmth of the small child in his arms. The silence of his life was broken, not by noise, but by the sound of a new purpose, a new love. The transformation of the house on the hill was gradual, and then all at once. The first change was the sound. Laughter, a sound so alien within those walls it was startling at first, began to echo in the marble hallways. The pitter-patter of small feet replaced the solemn, measured steps of the staff. The second change was the color. The muted palette of grays, creams, and beiges was slowly invaded by splashes of vibrant life. Lily's crayon drawings, no longer confined to the filing cabinet, began to appear on the giant stainless steel refrigerator. A bright pink backpack was often dropped by the front door. A collection of colorful, mismatched hair clips lived on the bathroom counter. The third, and most profound change was in Alistair himself. The tailored suits were often replaced by comfortable sweaters. The permanent shadow of grief in his eyes was replaced by a new light, a mixture of exhaustion, exasperation, and an emotion he was slowly learning to identify as joy. He learned the intricate politics of playdates. He learned how to make the perfect grilled cheese sandwich, cut into triangles, no crusts. He learned that a scraped knee could be cured with a cartoon-themed bandage and a hug. He officially adopted Lily, a simple legal formality for a bond that was already forged in the deepest chambers of the heart. Lily Blackwood. The name sounded right, as if it had been waiting for her all along. They filled the empty rooms of the house with new memories. They built forts out of sofa cushions in the living room, held movie marathons in the home theater with giant bowls of popcorn, and had picnics on the lawn among Isabella's roses. Alistair read to her every night, his deep voice narrating tales of dragons and magical lands, until she drifted off to sleep. One evening, as he was tucking her in, she looked up at him with those serious blue eyes. "Do you think she can see us?" she asked. "Isabella." Alistair smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. "I know she can," he said. He had finally told her the whole story, as much as he could, about the brave, loving choice her mother had made. He had shown her the cottage by the lake, which they now visited often. It was no longer a place of secrets and sorrow, but a place of connection, a bridge to the woman who had brought them together. They would sit on the porch, and Alistair would read Isabella's letters aloud, his voice weaving a story of a love that had never died. And Lily would listen, absorbing the legacy that was rightfully hers. She understood, in the way that children do, the heart of the matter. She was loved. Unconditionally. By the mother who gave her life, by the parents who raised her, and by the man who had found her, lost and alone, on a cold autumn day. A year after that fateful day, Alistair and Lily stood once again before Isabella's grave. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The air was crisp with the promise of a new autumn. Alistair held Lily's hand, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his. This time there was no sorrow in his heart, only a profound sense of peace and gratitude. Lily placed a handful of colorful, hand-picked wildflowers on the grave, a chaotic, beautiful bouquet that was so perfectly her. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice clear and confident. "We're doing good. Dad taught me how to ride a bike last week. I only fell down 3 times. She turned and beamed up at Alistair, and in her smile, in the dimple in her cheek, he saw Isabella, clear as day. It no longer haunted him. It comforted him. A living, breathing reminder that love never truly dies. It just changes form. Alistair looked at the name on the stone. "Thank you," he whispered, a message carried on the wind. "Thank you for the incredible gift you left me." He squeezed Lily's hand. "Ready to go home?" She nodded. "Can we get ice cream?" "Absolutely," he said, laughing. They walked away from the grave, hand in hand, their shadows stretching long behind them in the afternoon sun. The billionaire who had lost everything had found it all again in the most unexpected way. He had found a dirty little girl sleeping on his wife's grave, and in doing so, he had found the missing piece of his own soul. He had found his daughter, and together they were walking forward into a future that was brighter than he had ever dared to imagine. Thank you for reading this story. If you enjoyed this heartwarming journey of love, loss, and unexpected family, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspirational content. What was your favorite moment between Alistair and Lily? Let us know in the comments below.